It seems like every day things get worse and worse in our economy, in our country, in our politics, and all of these things that if you're online and you're paying attention to anything that's happening, it feels like the world is just kind of going down the crapper. You watch videos like this asking the question, are we heading to something like another Great Depression? And you see the parallels of the previous time we went through something like this versus right now. And then you start to wonder, how do we continue to go through the same things over and over and over again? And we never seem to learn from our past, and we keep making the same mistakes. And it always just seems like no matter what we do, we're doomed to just keep doing the same stupid crap over and over and over again. And for most people, you sit and you wonder, why do we keep doing this? We're reasonably intelligent creatures. We're able to kind of think rationally for the most part. Yeah, we get wound up in our emotions and everything, but we have the ability to make changes. And the answer to that question is super simple. It's not an answer that anybody wants to hear, but it is the reason, and it's the simplest and probably the most correct reason. And it's that the people who make the decisions on all of these kinds of things are exactly the kind of people you don't want making the decisions on these kinds of things. Now, while I tend to be very much a majority capitalist-minded kind of person, because I do believe that a free society is the best society, and the only way to have a free society is to have some form of capitalism as the main part of what's driving everything. But the problem with unfettered capitalism is that you get hyper-obsessive and hyper-narcissistic and hyper-controlling people who start grabbing more and more and more of the pie for themselves, and they rise to the top. And the problem with that is, to get to that part, you have to have a very high risk-taking personality. Very few of the people who have made it to the very tippy top of society are the kinds of people who are afraid of taking risks. They're perfectly fine putting it all on the line for with a roll of the die and hoping for the best. And it's happened in their favor enough times that they just keep going and keep going and keep going. And that's why we continue to run into the massive economic financial problems that we run into, because these people make these massive decisions and they convince our government to go along for the ride, and we continue making bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, getting lucky that, they're making these decisions, making calculated risks, which means that, for the most part, they tend to work out because they have an understanding of how systems and everything works. They have an understanding of which risks are the best risks to take for them. But the problem is that even with calculated risks, you're eventually going to crap out, and eventually something's going to come along to wipe you out. The longer you continue to gamble, the greater the chance that you end up coming up snake eyes. And when you're doing that on a grand economic scale, you end up with something like the Great Depression. It's the same kind of attitude that allows people to think that communism can somehow work because we just need to get the right people involved to have an altruistic outlook on the world and, do the right thing for the people and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, yeah, but we've seen how communism ends up working out. We understand that human nature is what it is. And as soon as people start gathering power, the idealistic views that they had before they had the power start getting washed away by the control that they have. And all of a sudden you have Stalin again. That's the way it works. The ultra-capitalists that we have now are exactly the same thing. It's just in a different system. People who have want more, and the more they get, the more control they want. And the people who rise to the top are usually the ones who are willing to take the most risks so that they can advance the quickest and acquire the most stuff in the fastest time possible. And those are exactly the kind of people that you don't want dictating how society is going to work, how economics are going to work. You want people who are going to promote a slow and steady wins the race kind of economy. This is why we continue to go through these massive swings of prosperity and then bust, and prosperity and then bust, and prosperity and then bust. Because these rich, wealthy, risk-taking personalities are up there making these decisions and forcing the rest of us to go along for the ride because we refuse to step up and hold them back. I would never advocate for heavy socialism or communism, but I do think that a reasonable amount of regulation on how big companies can be, and I mean how big companies can be from a monetary and control standpoint, how much wealth an individual can have, right? Because here's the thing. We set our government up in a way that made it so that, in theory, no one part of the government can get absolute control of everything. We really need to apply that to private citizens as well. There really needs to be a limit so that we can prevent people from, or at least make it more difficult for people to consolidate money and consolidate power around ideas that force the rest of us to go along for the ride and take their risks along with these rich people who, you know, are predisposed towards doing those things anyway. As somebody who tends to not be that much of a risk taker, it bothers me that all of these people are just gambling our future on these things that, you know, may help out the rich people and don't really help out us. But even if they had an altruistic reason for, you know, trying to make everything better for everybody, they're doing it in a way that is gambling and not planning for the future. And the rest of us just kind of have to go along for the ride. So if you're asking yourself, are we heading to another Great Depression? The answer to that question is absolutely yes. That's not even a question. The question we have to ask is when? When is that going to happen again? Because as long as the super risk-taking behavior that we continue to engage in for decade after decade continues, it's inevitable that it's eventually going to all come crashing down around us and we have to start over again. That's the way it works. You can either do things in a stable way that promotes slow growth, or you can go and reach for the stars with these massive money and power grabs that everybody continues to do, and eventually the instability of all that bites you in the ass and you get a depression again. Personal finance proves that over and over again. It just takes longer for nations to go through it. It's the same system, it's the same concept, it's the same forces all working in the same way. It's just on a different scale, so it takes longer. So that's what I wanted to say. Until we as normal people decide that we're tired of rich people deciding how our country is going to work, and we continue voting for people based on who spends the most amount of money rather than picking people who have the best ideas and who actually have a proven track record of doing what they say they're going to do, we're going to continue having these high-risk, narcissistic, egotistical people jumping up and forcing us down this path of chaotic lurching forward in progression, rather than a slow and steady wins the race in a way that benefits everybody model. It's just the way it's going to continue going. It requires you as a person, me as a person, each of us as individuals coming together and voting for people voting for people who are going to do things the way we believe they should be done, and then forcing them to do it once they're in. And that unfortunately requires the average person to get off their ass and do something about it. So who knows if that's going to happen. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hit the like button, subscribe to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and I'll see you for the next one.